Stephen, thank you very much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Given I'm presently reading your book, Matrimony, and also that I just got married with just my wife in a very short ceremony between just the two of us in New York a long time ago, it's provoking a lot of interesting thoughts. So I've been very much looking forward to having this conversation with you today.
Very good. Thank you too.
So, Stephen, as I've mentioned, I kick this off with the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Well, I don't know if I experience it in the form of a question, a kind of what if or how or sort of that ilk. I think it's more uh, a condition of ponder, you could call it maybe, than a driving, burning, singular spear point of a question. I think I've done that already. I think I've exhausted my spear point questions, at least for the time being. And I mean, the challenge before me very personally is to uh, to wonder what's the value of persistence as I've come to understand it so far. I mean, the condition of my life has been interesting. I never imagined a public one for myself, but that happened. And given certain reversals of sort of personal medical fortune, uh, the old standards and the old plans and so on. And the dream for my elderhood, I could put it that way, because I did have a kind of vision for it, is probably no longer available. And it's kind of it's shocking and it's bewildering at times. Excuse me. And it's unnerving. So all of these things combine to sort of throw me back on my heels a bit. Not that I haven't been there before, but this is kind of uncharted territory, and it's compromising. You see, so with all of that at play, um, who, what should I reasonably expect of the rest of my allotment? Has become a persistent place of point of contact, you could say, with fortune or fate. But let's remember fate. The meaning of fate is an important one for me now. Fate basically means, from the people who gave us the word, the Romans, fate means what has been summoned into existence by the gods. Fatum, yeah, that's basically what it means. It means the gods spoke the world into existence. That's what everything is. So those things are all givens. And the thing that remains is, what shall we do now that the gods have spoken? That's not a given. That's not part of what the gods made. What they made was everything to give us the opportunity to find ourselves in response ability. So, so my fate is so you could say before me now, in a way that it wasn't quite in years prior, excuse me. And that's what I'm thinking about. Most days, most hours of most days, in one form or another. I have a book coming out in a couple of weeks, a matrimony book. I'll have a book coming out a year from now, as of a deal I made yesterday, and another one thereafter. So it's not that I'm staring out the window at the rain. Thank God. That's not the deal. And I have an active farm here, which I'm the nominal patron of. And still, that what I've just described to you is the weather system I live. there.
Can you give me a sense, Stephen, just of when that, I love the expression, condition of ponderance. Is that, of pondering, I should say, is that something that has accompanied you through life for quite a while, or would you say is that a state or a state of being you've almost moved into at some point?
Um, I think it's both, actually. I don't think these things are exclusive. I think what happens is, I shouldn't generalize from my own experience. What happened with me is that there was a period of time of absolute uh, no information whatsoever as to who I was and what I was to make of who I was. I had no sense of momentum, you could say, or purpose or drive or goal or any of those kinds of things. But I wasn't without animation. I just didn't have the certainty that seems to go along with it when people talk about themselves, right? So I was kind of on the receiving or the buffeting, being buffeted end of the program for quite a long time. And I don't know where my sense of equanimity came from, that didn't overturn me or unstirrup me routinely, but it doesn't seem to have done so. What it seems to have done is set me up for the long haul. So I didn't have goals and dreams, let's say, as a person in his 20s. And for all of that, I suppose I had a sense of being accompanied in some way, that I was on the receiving end of some kind of attention. And that was somehow nourishing and fortifying and unnerving, because the entities that I'm alluding to here were not, neighbors down the street I could go visit, or books I could turn to, although I did do those kinds of things. But that's not where it was. And there were a few acute experiences through my teenage years and into my 20s, culminating with, and I mean this literally now, culminating with an encounter with an angel in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris before it burned down. Not literally the day before it burned down, but I mean in the years prior. That had a remarkable, stimulating and a stimulating presence thereafter, and a kind of authoritative presence thereafter. So it's a bit otherworldly, to be frank, and sometimes your life in this world may be the dream that another world has of you.
That's absolutely beautiful. Could you give me a sense of just that last sentiment there, that this may be the dream that another world has for you? There's something that sounds just kind of, I don't know, kind of perfect. There's almost like a perfect predicament to that, or something almost celestial to that, and mischievous in a way.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Is it possible? I mean, I've been hounded by the following question off and on for years. Is it possible to have a memory of something you have no lived experience of? Or is that all that memories are, is just a kind of domino of stuff that happens? Is that all it is? Can you remember stuff? Is it even proper to use the word memory to describe maybe intuitive take on things that includes stuff that never seems to have quite appeared, and yet it somehow mobilizes you or is manifest. And my answer ultimately now is absolutely, it's possible. It might even be mandatory. What is it? Well, if you credit the possibility that there's such a thing as the dead, let's start there. If the dead are not dust in a cemetery, if there's a kind of animate existence, I mean, this is very tricky language at this point, isn't it? But if there is, let's just say, if there is such a thing as the dead, if they're not done, if there's such a thing as well-lived, we use that term certainly to describe people who seem to have pulled it off, then you could credit the possibility that if there's such a thing as the dead, there's probably such a thing as well-dead to go with it. An accomplished dead guy, if you will. Okay. At this point, I'm now talking to you about ancestry here. If there is such a thing, excuse me a second. Ongoingly as that, then who are they to you? By which I do not mean what do you insist that they mean to you, or what meaning would you have from them? I mean, who are you to them as much as anything? So let me see if I can answer the question now, or summon an answer, or plead for an answer by speaking about it. So in my corner of the world here, and it's not exclusively a quote unquote indigenous person's philosophy or understanding, but it's a pretty prevalent notion, and it's an exceedingly useful one, which goes by typically by the term of, quote, the 7 generations understanding. And the notion finally is this: when you're making important decisions about your little life, you have an obligation, a deep, abiding moral code of an obligation to consider what the consequences will be for 7 generations from now, living the results of what you put into motion with your decision. It's a very onerous obligation, but for all of that, clearly it's a citizen's obligation, and it's probably a spirit obligation as well. And there's a lot of merit to be had from trying to follow through on that. And yes, you could be somewhat paralyzed with the enormity of the calculation, but just as readily or just as likely, you'd be at least as stymied without it, without the calculation or the notion. And then naysayers and cynics, and there's a few of them around, are likely to say something in the order of, well, this is all fantasy. That's all that, it's not a moral code, it's just fantasy. You're just scheming and dreaming here and pretending for all of that, that there's something called what you're talking about. To which I would say, well, it's not exactly fantasy for you to try to imagine 7 generations from now. I mean, we can't populate the vision necessarily. We can't equip the vision necessarily. We don't know the material culture. I mean, the way things are changing around us. You know, it's very hard to summon the notion of 7 generations from now, but there's a piece of information available to us that I haven't spoken about yet that goes a long way towards equipping you for the notion of behaving as if there will be 7 generations from now. And this is what it is. Everything does not begin with you or me now. That's not the meter, that's not the clock, that's not the metronome. We are on the receiving end of people's willingness to do exactly what I've just been describing. In other words, 7 generations ago, the likelihood is, or the possibility is, or please God, let it be so, that people 7 generations ago did proceed as if the likes of you and me may yet come to be. And if that's true, then we are we are the medium for a back and forth sway of 14 generations. We're not the initiator of anything. We are the recipient, the conduit, the passer on of stuff moving both ways, if you will. It sounds a bit linear, but I think you take the gist of what I'm saying here. And if you're willing to sign up for that kind of duty, then you credit consequence attached to what you come up with, but not self-importance. There's a difference there, right? So the consequence is a mighty thing to entertain and to assume. I find that enormously assuring. I don't find it easy, but I find the ebb and flow of genuine consequence to be a meaning-driven thing, a meaning-generating thing, a purpose conjurer, if you will. It takes a little, you got to be a bit nervy, don't you? You have to be a bit bold to understand yourself as being in the tidal sway of what I just described. But this is a long way of saying to you, it's more than possible that you have memories of things that you haven't experienced. Those memories of things is your ancestry, your prior ancestry and your subsequent ancestry, sort of washing back and forth across you as the tide would, stones on the beach. Yeah.
To me, it sounds as well when you're kind of just laying that out, there's almost like an inherent sense of belonging. You know, when I think of the world nowadays and people often kind of get a sense that they don't belong or that maybe they don't even feel enough. There's something about that lived and felt experience of just the connection both ways to and like to the consequences of decisions now and also just what's gone before us. There's something really beautiful about almost a sense of feeling embedded within it all almost. The the sentiment you shared there though a little moment ago around feeling accompanied and then this sense of attention. Could you just elaborate on that, like just what you're pointing to with that felt sense of attention? There's something that sounded really beautiful in that.
Well, it's the difference between being needed and being important, I would say. I mean, I think that's a helpful distinction to make. We would appear to be mandatory elements in the karmic wheel. I mean, it's not my language. I shouldn't use karmic wheel, but I like the notion. We're obviously actors. We're obviously consequential generators of stuff. But we're so much on the receiving end as we fancy ourselves to be originators and progenitors of all this material that there's a degree of caution that comes with it, a kind of counsel of caution or of humility, not humiliation. That's somebody else's racket. What I'm talking about is a kind of stand down humility where you seriously credit the consequences that spin off from you, most of whom don't really obey your intention. And that you realize that at the same time that this is true for you, it is more than likely true for all of those surrounding you. And so you're not unique or pristine in this matter. And yet, for all of the caveats, you are clearly required reading for the world, if I could put it this way. You are required reading. The world is obliged to dance with you in some way, and you with the world. And I mean, it's one of the reasons to turn to the Matrimony book briefly for a second. You know, when people came to me to do their weddings for them, it was a ludicrous thing for them to do because I'd never done the likes of that before. I had no inclination to do it. There's no advertising. There's no interview in which I seem to be hankering after that kind of notoriety or that kind of experience at all. So, you know, I would ask them, you know, why me? What are they looking for that's not available in the generic, you know, marketplace of weddings and stuff? And they didn't know, but they just had a sense, an intuition that something fundamental and mandatory was missing from the usual fray. Could I supply it somehow? In order to do that, you do have to cultivate a sense that I'll call parabolically, I'll describe it this way. You have to cultivate a sense of the presence of the absence of things. And the way I've tried to describe that in the book was to say, when people say to me, where did you come up with all this stuff to do the kind of wedding that you did, that you describe in the book? And my answer is, you know, when you're on the beach, and if you're poking around and you have some idleness, some leisure to go with the day, it's possible, depending on the beach and yourself, that you could find something that's not, in this case, a shell. It's not a bit of broken glass. You're not sure what it is. It's been ground away upon by the surge and the tides and all the rest, all the wave action. And yet it's recognizable as something that's not what maybe you would call naturally occurring. And as you study this thing, you begin to realize that by virtue of its shape, its edges, and so forth, it's a part of something. It's unto itself, it's not a whole something. And that there's something about the shape and the nature of the brokenness that implies, that whispers something about its appearance when it was whole, its intactness, its use, its utility, its appearance in the world, its what it carried, and so forth. You can do this with an active imagination and some genuine information before you. I did that with matrimony. I looked at the shards that were still around, if you will, things like the architecture of the seating arrangement in the typical ceremony, the aisle up the middle, the procession, little details like the confetti or the rice, things like that, the giving away at the front of the room, the appearance of gifts mysteriously, and who they may have originally been for. The tense of the language, the grammatical tense of the language that's used at the front of the hall, not a future tense language, not will you, but do you. All of these details, and I'm a detail guy, they really appealed to me. And they employed my imagination, my observing imagination. So here's this absence, here are these shards, and here's the work. What did it look like when it worked and it was whole? That's the job. That's the job not only of an officiant at a broken down modernist, postmodern ceremony. It's the job of humans who are on the receiving end of their, I'll use your word, the longing of their ancestors. Yeah. So the difference between longing and belonging, this is a beautiful old English word here. The condition of belonging has nothing to do with feelings. The condition of belonging means this: the BE prefix in all Old English words is an intensifying prefix. It doesn't really have inherent meaning syntactically, it has a function. It says to you, whatever follows the BE is intensified by the BE. Okay? So, bewilder, besotted, beguiled, before. I mean, when you start going down the list of how many BE prefix words there are in English, there's a lot of them. So clearly, the ancestors who spoke this language and gave it to us thought very highly of this particular function of being able to intensify something by putting that prefix on it. And then the root of the word. Well, what is it? What's the difference between longing and desiring? In the marketplace of contemporary feelings, there is no difference. They're basically 1 and 1A, aren't they? One sounds slightly more elegant, one sounds slightly more naked. But other than that, they sound like they're both acquisitive in some fashion. It's not true at all. Desire has that rap going for it, of course. Desire's gig is to obtain and then to be dissatisfied with what it was obtained and then go get some more at a never-ending rate. That's how desire works. It's never really satisfied because it's not trying to stop. It says it's trying to stop. That's what the goal of your desire, you're trying to reach the goal of your desire is all about, so you can stop desiring. But it's not actually how it works. The way desire works is it keeps doubling down on the not yet. Longing, on the other hand, is an elegant, by comparison, a deeply elegant proposition that goes like this. It's not trying to stop. It's not pretending it's trying to stop. Longing is the kind of sweet sorrow that Shakespeare talked about. Longing has the following thing going for it. You can be in the presence of what you long for, be it a place, an era, a person, a sensibility, a story. You can be in the presence of what you long for and long for it all the more at the same time, with no sense of frustration or futility. Isn't that a stunner? And that's the condition of belonging. The condition of belonging, feeling that you belong, is not a feeling. It's an achievement, you see. It's a willingness to consider what I've just said here and undergo the work of cultivating the capacity to long without pretending you're trying to get satisfied. And that act of longing provides the repertoire for acting out your belonging. And that's the condition of spirit citizenship for humans, belonging. So I'm glad you brought the word up.
Do you know, I must say there's a kind of a moistness in my eyes that's accompanying most of what you're saying. It just feels deeply, without it like creating any kind of sense of overwhelm or something, just this accompaniment in what you're saying. It feels like it's just touching something so fundamentally human. And I don't know, there's just something really, just wanted to say that there's something really gorgeous to the quality of what you're saying and how you're actually just communicating that as well. Just really intrigued with matrimony and the the presence of the absence of things. And when you're looking at some of the shards or fragments of the tradition that you're still, that you're still intrigued by, or that you're holding and almost imagining what these belong to in a capacity in which it actually functioned or maybe even served. Could you give me a sense of just how you move from that, like just your process in in just moving beyond that into I guess what you then ended up creating on both the suggestions, or I'm sure what you're sensing from the people that have approached you, and also just your examinations of the details before. Could you give us just a sense of how that kind of takes form for you?
Well, I can tell you what happened. I can generalize across the various ceremonies I did do. Uh, the beginnings were remarkably similar. No matter how the people came to me, they came to me, I alluded to this a few minutes ago, with a sense of dis-ease more than anything, not excitement, not, not sort of crinkly crinoline anticipation. It was foreboding almost. My God, what and from whence comes all of this? And the answer is from all the weddings they saw before their own. That's where it comes from. Well, what did that do to them? Well, it seemed to have unnerved them. How so? Well, they came away from these things defeated,
Hmm.
almost across the board. What in them was defeated? Answer is the notion that it actually could be otherwise. And so, with this kind of poverty of real options before them, they kind of, I would say, collapsed in a sense into a devotion to their personal vision to the extent that they had one. Their commitment, their kind of almost zeal to see through this kind of gauzy glimpse that they had into the otherwise, right? But where did all the notions come from that supply them with their personal vision of their private wedding? And the answer is they just, not unlike what we did here in Canada to produce the country called Canada, we just kept avoiding the American example. And in so doing, imagined ourselves to backing into some other kind of reality. It's very similar with these people I'm talking about. They backed away from all the weddings they'd been invited to and been subjected to, and imagined that something would happen sort of affirmingly by doing so. But that's not what happens, of course. What happens is you're crafting a kind of aversive response or posture, and it turns into something that's bizarrely, acutely, painfully inward looking, sort of centripetal. That's right, centripetal. Something that's basically what I called it in the book is they privatized love, turned it into an inner state, turned it into a personal and prized possession to do with as they saw fit, to kind of build some kind of protective sort of gauzy cocoon around it called you and me, baby, against the world. All that sensibility. And the privatizing of love, as I've come to understand it, is the impoverishment of romance. Fundamentally, the impoverishment takes the following form. It draws away from the culture. It leaches from the culture. It leaches from the community. It leaches from the village and becomes a a kind of fortress sensibility of 2 by 2. We imagine ourselves to be recreating the best of us. See. So what did I do in response to observing this kind of withdrawing, kind of isolating, and kind of making a nucleus of something that once upon a time I was certain was there to nourish and stimulate and inform the culture, not draw down from the culture and make it ever so, even more of what it isn't than it already wasn't. The best way I could describe it to you is the very last act, which is the morning after. So let's imagine the big festivities and so on was all through the course of Saturday, and the ceremonies I did lasted in around 7, 8, 9 hours. So no 15-minute wedding when I was around. 7 or 8 or 9 hours, you might be thinking, Jesus, man, what were you doing? And the answer is most of the time, believe it or not, people were talking, not amongst themselves. No, in the context of the ceremony, they were talking. And if you want to hear more, I can tell you more in a moment. But so at the height of the storm, if you will, I found some way to say, by the power vested in me by absolutely no one at all, I hereby pronounce and certify that the village around you has seen you and now means for you, for your union, to be its latest, greatest accomplishment and treasure. Its treasure, not yours. So that was kind of the night. And I can talk. So I was able to really dial it in. If I was on my game, but it was the next morning that I was living for. And in the next morning, I quietly said to the people that I had nominated to be kind of my ceremonial kind of posse, if you will, to gather all the wedding party together one more time after a year's worth of preparation, one more time, somewhere hopefully away from the throng and the clamor and so forth, and we would find a place. And I did many of these things here on my farm, so we had lots of fields to do this in. So I had them, come together in a very tight circle, shoulder to shoulder. I said, this is it, this is what you granted me. And, I'll be forever grateful that you've done so. But we're finished now. It's over. And you really won't know the meaning of lonely until you walk away from this. Loneliness will be part of it. That misty-eyed sensibility that you described a few minutes ago, you can imagine it's in spades this particular morning, no? In the presence of, alongside all of the upside and the mirth and the relief and the joy and the sense of accomplishment, there's this sense that something's even now slipping away. And it's dissolving somehow. So I said, take a good long look around this tiny little circle, because it will never be this again. It's not supposed to continue to be like this. This is too condensed. It's too intense to be lived out this way. We have to redistribute it somehow and lend it back to where it came from. All this ability, all this skill that you've acquired all this time, it has to go somewhere now. So say goodbye to each other. I'll give you a moment to do it. Say it aloud. And people did it. And of course, there's a lot of weeping and all this, a lot of gratitude, a lot of sense of frailty and vulnerability, a lot of unwillingness to turn the page, all understandable. I said, now turn around without moving. In other words, rotate on the axis that you're standing on, still shoulder to shoulder. But now you're not facing each other, are you? No, you're facing out. To what? To the rest of the day, to the rest of your lives, to all the people that aren't here, and all the things yet to be. That's where you're headed now. All I ask you is that you bring what you saw with you, that you don't leave it behind. And that when I ask you to walk towards the world now, that you do so without turning back, because it's over. And you have to get it over by redistributing the kind of spirit wisdom that's been available to you during this time into the world that's waiting for you now, that's been obliged to proceed without you over all of these many months of preparation. It deserves you now, and it will employ you if you give it a chance. So walk and don't look back. And they did. And that's how you seed the clouds for some kind of better day. I shouldn't say that's the way. I should say that's what I found as a, the proper, how can I put this? The real genius of a ceremony is in how it ends, not really how it's conducted. If you don't craft the ending, you've left things desperately uninformed and unformed, frankly. Yeah. So endings are exceedingly important. In fact, they're so important that the Greeks had a word for the ending of the kind of ceremony of hospitality that they were so famous for. They had an actual word for how to stop being ceremoniously hospitable. It was called Pompe, from which we get our word pomp. Today, of course, pomp means all of the friggin' over-the-top British stuff, doesn't it? All the processing and all the queens and the kings and all of that gear. That's what it tends to mean. It tends to mean if we call someone pompous, we're not admiring them at all. We're imagining them to be overinflated and ludicrous in some fashion. In actual fact, the word is a specific strategic word in the repertoire of hospitality. It's the moment of the hospitality where the hospitality officially ends, where the guest or the visitor is turned back out into the road, provisioned and fed and cared for and doted over and wished well upon. Without it, the Greeks would have understood the hospitality to be half done, no matter how long it lasted. Without an ending, there's a cruelty involved. It's the same with the ceremonies as I described it to you now.
Yeah, when you said that, there definitely felt like a very strong, like firmness to the love in having that kind of care around the ending.
Yeah.
You've also just the idea of how people might back away when I alluded to it just at the very beginning. That's definitely how I would kind of define my own experience with marriage. It was not that and a backing away. But when I was reading your book and also just with what you said there, there's this beautiful way in which you describe almost this is the sharing of ritual to be an enriching of the community, like it's a gift. And that's something that when I read that, it was like I hadn't really I hadn't contemplated it from that perspective because I was just so clear that it wasn't going to be, many of the things that you've alluded to. So that's definitely given me something to maybe contemplate or to call into action at some point. I'm just really intrigued though, the the day before the final day, when you said it could be 9 hours and people are really talking, not talking amongst themselves. And I know in the book you point to this sense of, for it to really be a ritual, there almost needs to be that. The way I define it is almost like this healthy fear that, we don't know what's going to happen. In terms of the just even the sense of those conversations that were occurring, I got a really strong sense of just the vulnerability that might be inherent within it, and just this almost this the white heat of possibility that comes with what you're suggesting. I just love to get a sense of you from your perspective, what it was like in the moment, and maybe a sense of some of the things that occurred.
God, man, you're talking as if you were there. I mean, these are very good images that you've just conjured up for to give a feel for. I'm not sure I'd use the word fear, though.
Okay.
I would say a healthy kind of attenuation, a kind of tunedness and a concern for sure. All of that's in there. And you could, by fear, if you mean a concern that it could go sideways, a genuine, even informed concern that it could go sideways, I would say absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, fear is kind of useless. It's like being a sailor and being afraid of drowning. It's kind of useless, especially on the job. So, one of the great quotes I heard years ago about ceremony was, a good ceremonialist is not somebody who knows what to do. Man, there's lots of people who know what to do. A good ceremonialist is the guy who knows what to do when everything turns to shit, when everything goes sideways, which if you summon the saints, which is not an unwise thing to do, you're asking for that too. You're asking for, literally now, bewilderment. Now you know what bewilderment actually means. It doesn't mean confusion, does it? It means an intense encounter with the wild, doesn't it? That's what it means. It means the wild is having its way, and your domestication is coming in for heavy weather. That's what bewilderment means. And I courted bewilderment in these proceedings. You can tell. I wasn't playing fast and loose. That's not what I mean. Otherwise, why did I have a years-long preparation? Okay, the years-long preparation was a kind of spirit tuition for these people, And okay, in my jurisdiction, until fairly recently, it was a legal requirement to utter the following. If there's anybody here who knows any good reason why this thing should not proceed, speak now, or of course, everybody knows this part, forever hold your peace. Okay, what's going on there? Why would this be a legal requirement for eons? Well, there is the matter of, in the old days, of record keeping and the possibilities of bigamy. That's certainly part of it. But it's by no stretch all of it. The rest of it is it possible, the officiant is saying, that this thing should not go forward and that there's good, cogent reasons why? Is it possible? Any sane adult in the room has to agree that there is possibility that this is so. Oh, you mean one of the two knuckleheads at the front of the room are not capable? Of course. Listen, this is a given that they're not capable. Would you listen to the shit that they're being obliged to say? I mean, do you honestly think that anybody's capable of doing that stuff? I mean, it's laughable and it's frankly galling at the same time. Do you take and do this and do that and do this and so? And of course, you just say yes, like a mumbling kind of impatient type, And the real question is, And from whence comes this repertoire you imagine yourself to be drawing upon to pull all this stuff off that you're declaring with no hesitation whatsoever that you're prepared to do? How do you friggin' know this about yourself? And the answer is, you don't, do you? Nope. And that's the origin of this cold feet thing, isn't it? Yep. And now you know why they have 15-minute weddings. 15-minute weddings are there to subvert the possibilities. So you're left with only one, the sleepwalking conclusion. That's what you're left with. Repeat after me. That's what you're left with. And people imagine if they write their vows themselves that none of this stuff is true. That suddenly it's all authentic and it's real and it's good and it can't lose and it can't fail and it can't wither and it can't blink. I suggest to you that self-penned vows are this kind of spirit, culture, poverty that I've been alluding to now, pronouncing itself. Because if you listen to the vows that people come up with on their own, left to their own devices, man, a lot of them go interior like bad poetry, like bad poetry. Immediately private, immediately self-referential, immediately boxing out, any witnesses. Think about what the word witness is supposed to be. You're an invited guest in order to do what? To drink and eat their food? Well, you'll do that, but that's not why you're there. That's the payoff for being there. Why are you there? And the word witness is the best word to use to answer the question. And a witness turns out not to be a passive observer. A witness turns out to be a participant, if you will, a registrar. The witnesses are the places where the ceremony actually happens and detonates and endures over time. That's what witnessing, that's why we use the word bear as a verb to describe what we do with what we witness. We bear witness. We carry it over time. Why? Because the two marzipan figures at the front of the room are in delirium. That's why. Because they're barely responsible for their own behavior today. That's why. Because they can't be relied upon over the long term to even remember what they vowed to do. Never mind to actually do what they vowed to do. Now you know who you are as a witness. You're the one who makes it real. You're the one who holds them to it. You're the one who brings the memories when they're not sought. You see? Yeah, just as a beginning.
When you mentioned even your engagement with them prior to the ceremony and the time of that, the word that struck me was almost like a fortitude, and also just the almost the active or the participatory nature of the witness, and the contrast between that and what we kind of maybe used to in normal wedding ceremonies or whatever term we could give to it. It's so like the contrast feels so stark. Just looking at the time though, Stephen, and there's obviously many, many questions I'd like to ask still, but just, looking at some of the things you've mentioned, this condition of pondering that you find yourself in life, flutterings of a dream for the elderhood, notions of the fates of the gods and knowing your part within that, and even just how it's brought you to that conversation with life, and even what it's brought you in terms of officiating these ceremonies and into matrimony and further books that will come from it. Just so many deeply rich kind of sentiments, even the presence of the absence of things, the role of imagination, but also even just what I'm left with the depth of, as I said, my reaction to your words. I'm really curious to ask you, Stephen, the question of what is a good life for you?
This is, with everything I just mentioned to you, with all its slings and arrows. I mean, I don't know if it's the only life, but I'm referring here to sort of called other realms of existence and all. I don't know about all that sort of thing. I got my hands full with this one. But I would say, with all of its heartache, and God knows the heartache is real and persistent, with all of that, it'll do. It'll more than do. If only the information that we have about our impending limits retroactively emboldened us to occupy the time we're granted. I don't mean occupy as a possession. I mean fully inhabit, so that the best part of us is really drawn down into the earth as a kind of sustaining, nutritive presence for what's to come. Man, that'd be something.
The notion, Stephen, of fully inhabited, and also just the ceremony that you were alluding to there, and just what you're, how I feel the energy from you in this conversation is, it feels like a fierce aliveness, and with the heartache, with whatever else that may be, with the awe and the joy of it all. Stephen, that was an absolute pleasure, and just thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. That was a real joy.
It was a substantial joy that's present, we have no obligation to dispel, because in a few seconds we won't be talking any longer. The visitation I was lucky enough to have with respect to matrimony, being called upon by younger people, them finding themselves in a desperate state, the longing after some kind of something real, which they confuse with something good, as in untroubling. These are all rookie beginner understandings of things, We have to become, I'll just leave everyone with this notion. We have to become a little more grown up in our understanding of what's needed of us, And one of the ways to do that is, of course, you have needs. The truth of the matter is, you have needs that no one can possibly satisfy. That's the order of things. All right. So, as needy as you may be, as I may be, the obligation in a troubled time like the one we find ourselves in is to proceed as if you're needed. And that's what I've tried to do. So thank you for a bit of a window for me being able to reflect for a few moments on what that's looked like a time or two.